Okay. So we're just missing Trish and Sarah, correct?
And this is Mallory. Trish and I spoke, and she's not able to make it. She had another conflict and apologizes.
Okay, well, maybe Sarah, oh, here's Sarah. She joined. She just joined. Okay. Yes, Chris, let's start.
Okay, you want to call a meeting to order, Mary, as normal?
Yeah, I'm calling this special meeting on March 10th at 9:02. It's an appeal. Present are Mary McGann, Commissioner, Chris Baird, County Administrator, Commission Administrator, Mallory Nassau, Associate Commission Administrator, Quinn Hall, Clerk Auditor, Evan Clapper, Commissioner, Christina Sloan, County Attorney, Kevin Walker, Commissioner, Jock Hadler, Commissioner, Gabriel Wojtek, Commissioner, Sarah Stott, Commissioner, Abby Scott, Planning Staff, and Scott Anderson representing the person with the appeal. Thank you.
Okay. So on December 17th, the appellate requested a interpretation of the land use code and the general plan. And then on January 11th, our planning and zoning director replied via email with the requested interpretation. And so I believe what is before you today is an appeal of that January 11th, 2020 interpretation, which has been spelled out in the appeal that you have in your packet. I just want to point out that this is not an appeal of the PUD decision. That's a separate element that's in district court. This is just an appeal of the interpretation, and the outcome of this appeal will have no direct effect on the decision to approve the PUD. So we're just talking right now only about the merit of the interpretation. The commission has the ability to either affirm the interpretation or amend it. And so that's what we're going to be doing here today. And so with that, I think I'll just turn it over to the appellate if they have any arguments that they'd like to provide or to go through their appeal with the commission. Turn it over to them.
For me, my appeal, the interpretation is probably good enough. I know Scott has some key points he'd like to make.
Okay.
Sorry, I was having a hard time coming off mute there. Yeah, I think that there are a number of things which we agree on, and I would maybe be helpful to state those specifically, but just to confirm, it remains our contention that the implementation of the PUD vehicle has still been used inappropriately or outside the intended provisions or reasons for having such a PUD, okay? And those are the things that we would like to continually raise. I would like to offer a thank you to all of you for taking the additional time to look at this and hear us specifically on a separate issue. We would like to acknowledge as well that with your agendas on routine meetings, it seems almost impossible that you would be able to take an in-depth look at the many issues that could be contemplated in any decision. So again, I think it's beneficial and helpful that you can take this additional time to hear this concern that we continue to have around this decision. And thank you for your time again this morning to have a look. In looking through all of the notes, I'm not sure how far that would be beneficial to dig through all of them, because I think that there are a number of things that we look at the code, that the intent of a PUD is not to increase density. but rather to have the benefit of a number of other things that it calls out, to which each and every, and attached to this agenda, you would find a recount from our outside counsel. The more I look over those claims and opinion from our counsel, the more resolute I think that those arguments are as we continue through this. But let me raise one, meaning I would hope you would all go back and take some time to look at those statements along with Christina's statements, Christina Brinegar. Am I getting that right, Christina? Do I say it okay? Brinegar?
Perfect.
Thank you. Which have been in depth and very, very carefully looked at and orchestrated. So it's a lot to look through, but I would encourage and request that you would look through those arguments in these cases, because in virtually every reason or rationale for implementing a PUD, it doesn't fit this situation. Virtually none of the objectives of a PUD are satisfied in what's presented here. And I'll state them sort of top line again. To preserve and utilize open space, not provided for in this case. To cluster the developments to allow, so put the residences or homes in a closer area and allow for this open space. Not even close. You have, in this presentation, you have 3 small lots and 3 large lots, all of which are residences, which is not the intent of the PUD, okay? So this is solely an opportunity used as a vehicle for the developer to get 3 lots for sale and maintain the other existing larger lots, not open space, just lots. Now, in the 1997 approval, I've heard clearly that there were the approval some 24 years ago stipulated 6 lots, 6 1-acre lots as allowable. And then it's been shared with us that this is in some way a taken decision, okay? And when I worked with Mila, I said, well, Mila, let me kind of put on my developer hat for a minute and share. What it should have said, Mila, is up to 6 lots. And her words were, yes, that would have been better. In other words, if you have 6.5 acres, there's no guarantee you get 6 lots, ever. By the time you have to look at engineering, road, ingress, egress, service, existing structures, floodplain, if you have 100 acres, you don't get 100 lots. If you have 5 acres, you don't get 5 lots. And in this case, I mean, hopefully you could in some cases, but when you have 6.5 acres, there is no guarantee you get 6 lots. So my argument to Mila originally was, by the time you look at existing structures, ingress, egress, and setbacks, you're not going to get 6 lots, even if you don't change the use of the roads as a separate parcel. And she acknowledged that. She said, yeah, but the problem the county is facing is that this approval said 6 lots. Well, it said 6 1-acre lots. So what it should have said was platted, if platted, get the yieldable lots. So up to 6 lots. Yes, we wouldn't be in this situation. That being the case, the intent of the PUD is to not increase density. And this is our primary argument. If you have 4.69 acres available for development without increasing density, no matter what the lot size, you can only grant 4 parcels on this spot. It can't be any different. If you have, I'll just say it again, if you have 4.7 acres, you cannot increase, even in the PUD vehicle, you cannot increase density. If you have 4.7, and you put 6 parcels on there, you're increasing density. Chris, you raised your hand, please.
So I just want to make sure we're not going to get off the tracks here. when you submit an appeal, Scott, you need to stick with the arguments within the appeal. So, and the practice here, what the outcome would be to either affirm interpretation or not. And so it's going to be much more helpful if we zero in on an element of that interpretation, and you can use the numbers or however you want to do it. But we need to discuss specifically the interpretation and the arguments that you made in your appeal. And so if we're going to get anywhere, I think you would need to identify where in the interpretation specifically you're challenging, so that the commissioners can determine whether or not they want to amend or uphold that interpretation.
Thank you, Chris. I think, and maybe this would be an area where Christina Brinegar could help, but I did read the submission and the appeal, and in that appeal, we are talking density. So I've probably gone beyond her wording on this, but I want to shape the argument around the density, because this is, again, the one.
This is, just to interrupt, it's number 2 in Mila's response. So the density was an argument made. So if you can focus on that portion, that'd be great.
Yeah, so focusing on the density, anytime when we would take a 4.7 available plattable acres and turn that into 6 parcels, that is an increase in density. That's the argument, pure and simple, okay? And our position would be that even if there was a implementation and it were platted, that smaller lots would be allowable. In no case can you increase the density under the PUD tool. Now, just to build out on that a little bit further, I want to share the past history about this argument. Again, very quickly. Even if, per the county's request, and it was clarified to us that it was not a policy, but a request to not use the road to count towards the parcel sizes. And thus the situation we're in today. But even if, and we replatted and used an engineer, even if you went to the old 1997 platting, you would not yield 6 parcels due to structures, trees, ingress, egress. Okay, so under either consideration, there are not 6 buildable lots there on that parcel. Therefore, implementing a PUD increases density. Okay, so we can.
Well, let me know, Mr. Anderson or Ms. Brinegar, when you would be done with this particular section, then I'll give Ms. Sloan an opportunity to respond.
Yeah, done with that section. Or go ahead out to Christina Brinegar. I don't know if you have any addition to that.
I don't, and it is on the appeal.
Thank you.
You bet.
Okay. Ms. Sloan, do you have a response?
Sure. So just to focus the commission, because you are hearing a lot of stuff here, this is, Scott's really focusing on number 2, on Mila's interpretation. I do want to make one correction. She dated this January 11, 2020. She did issue it on January 11, 2021, just so for the record. So in number 2, this argument was made by their counsel in her letter, and then Christina B. in her request outlined the same, what I call a creative but legally flawed argument, that the applicant really only had 4.7 acres to deal with. Scott is incorrect that in his argument about the up to 6 acres on a 6.48 acre parcel, where a residential requires 1 acre per lot. It does not say 1 acre per lot minus trees, drainage, ingress and egress. That's incorrect. It says 1 acre per lot. So the original PUD did vest interest in 6 lots on Tract A. In addition, it allows for clustering. So the road parcel request by the county is not a requirement. So that was not something that we had to approve or that the applicant had to comply with. And all it does is encourage the clustering that would then help address best practice is to put these roads in separate parcels. And then it also creates a variety of sizes of lots, which is an appropriate use of the PUD. You've heard some arguments that, and Mila makes this point in her interpretation as well, this is not true affordable housing. The county is not claiming that. And so the PUD tool may be used to increase density if there are affordable housing or open space incentives. That is not the county's position. Mila didn't take that position here, so I don't want to get that confused. But a variety of lots does create variety in pricing and also allowing bigger tracts with more open space. So that's all consistent. That's really all I have to say. And, you know, hopefully the commission's also read through the interpretation and is comfortable with Mila's response there, which is 2 paragraphs long.
Chrissy, could you speak to the property owner's rights regarding the final plat specific to this that was recorded in the 90s?
So it's called a final plat, but it was the PUD tool at the time. So there was no master plan at the time. It's a good point. If anything, it creates additional rights in the 6 lots by the applicant. And applying the land use code that's in effect at the time of submission, we required the applicant to conform to current land use code requirements, including the master plan requirement. So we've cleaned that up, and that what was approved was a master plan, and then the applicant still has to come back to the council for a final plat.
But the master plan that was approved at that time, any kind of changes to that, what would that look like?
Right, and so that is governed by our code, and there's a minor amendment section and there's a major amendment section. Obviously, the major amendment requirements are more burdensome to the applicant, and so we did require that he go through the more burdensome process, which is essentially the same as a new PUD process. So we reviewed it anew and took it through the process that way.
This time, and
This time.
yeah.
This may have been the first PUD approved in the county in the 90s, but we're not sure. It certainly was one of the first.
So I just need to respond, Christina. I think I may have been misunderstood. I certainly understand that when you have trees, if you may have some drainage, if you have may have anything on a piece of property that section becomes non-buildable, I totally understand that. And I fully understand that would count towards the square footage to satisfy 1 acre parcels. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is when you take a total available to build area, now you plat that most efficiently. Ingress, egress, your roads, everything you can do to get the maximum use of the spot. All I'm saying, and all we're saying, continue to say, is that under the roads being put in a separate parcel, which was as well a request from the county, and we understand the logic behind that, we don't dispute it at all. But what we're saying in doing that, you only yield 4.7 usable acres for residents. In other words, you can never go into any situation, in my experience, ever, and say, I have, again, 100 acres, I'm going to put 100 residents. It's just not that clear cut. We get it all. You've got to have all of the other uses and requirements around the land. And that's what's happened here. The county has said, look, we would prefer that you would set aside the roads and not put those in parcels with easements through them. We don't dispute that. If Larry would like to reverse that and plat it, we would be in favor of that as well. I'm just pointing out it would not still yield 6 usable full parcels under the 1 acre designation. Our position is you can't increase density, so you've got to use the same yield under 1 acres and then overlay that in your new PUD cluster. Fine, do it. But don't increase density.
Okay, and I'd like to clarify that this is not an increase in density. That is my legal opinion. And that was Mila's finding as well. If this was a final plat, then he would be governed by 1 lot per 1 acre in the rural residential. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a plan unit development, and the whole purpose of a plan unit development is flexibility and the option to cluster for best practice. And that's exactly what the commission approved here. And again, because we're not actually arguing the merits of the approval, we're arguing the merits of the PUD major amendment process that the county took this application through. And that was the appropriate, the major amendment of the PUD, and of course the PUD had already been approved, was an appropriate vehicle. And this was an appropriate use to allow for clustering, to allow the roads to be put in a separate parcel, which is best practice. So just to be clear, it is my legal opinion, it is Mila's opinion in the interpretation, that this is not an increase in density. The applicant was entitled to 6 lots. He has 6 lots.
Okay.
Scott, we're not going to keep debating it. So if
We
you want to
have
make
to,
any other
Christina,
argument beside density,
Christina,
I think now is
Christina, I'm going to read from it. PUD period. However, allowed use and maximum density must be determined by the underlying base district. The underlying base district is rural residential 1 acre. So put the PUD in,
there are
but do
6
not
lots.
increase density. If you go from 4 to 6, how does the simple math not say you're increasing density? Don't make us crazy here. All we're saying is change the whole thing and do it, but stop telling us you're not increasing density by the magic wand of saying you're not. If you go from 4 lots to 6, you increase density, period. Come on.
The
And not to
underlying
mention-
base zone allows 6 lots, and that's what you have. Let's envision that the road was an open space parcel and not a road at all. That's the whole point, is you cluster the 6, you get under the base zone in one area, and you allow other parts of the property to be used in other ways. And that's what we have here. Scott, we're not going to allow you to make other arguments. If you want to make other arguments besides density that we haven't discussed, you could do that. Otherwise, I think we need to move to the commission.
Well,
I'll make one.
Go ahead, Christina.
Okay. You and Mila have continued to say clustered development. And in your grand use codes, it says clustered development is to allow for open space, recreation, or agricultural uses, which we know has not been done. Can you guys explain why you've used clustered development and not provided open space?
If I can, and I don't know, Christina, if you can answer this, but we used to have an open space requirement, which was in effect at the time that the land use code was adopted, or the land general plan was adopted. And in the interim, the open space requirements were removed from the land use code. So one thing to realize is that the general plan is quite old at this point, and the land use code has evolved since then.
That's correct. And I also want to emphasize that section 4.4.1, which is where our PUD purposes are set forth, established that the PUD can be used to accomplish any one of a number, A through G purposes. And one of those is encourage more efficient use of land and public streets, utilities, and governmental services. That is the section that applies here. We are clustering the development. And clustering that, you could say it as we are exercising flexibility with the lot configuration to comply with 4.4.1C. So I don't want you to focus on open space, because we never required open space in this PUD.
But I will say Mila said it about 175 times, open space and undeveloped and clustered development. So there is a huge argument as to why I filed for the interpretation. Scott he's right on point with acreage. There's just not enough. Not to mention, we were told over and over and over again, the land was going to be undeveloped. There was going to be open space, and you guys were going to preserve ag land. So I think you guys could understand our concerns. When the person in charge is supposed to oversee land use code, kind of dropped the ball.
And
No,
admitted the error in continuing to use that designation of open space, but too little, too late. I think what
And
we're making here. Sorry, go ahead.
The PUD wasn't approved under an open space or affordable housing or agricultural thing. That was never any of the action that this body took. So
Understood, but when it was brought to the residents, it was continually used in that language that was a benefit from it, and that's why it should be acceptable. And so it appeased the people around that are living through here, and it was used as an argument for the implementation of it. And then we're just saying it was incorrect. And it fairly may have been retracted, but too little too late. There wasn't a big public notice in the same way there was a public notice that the PUD
well,
had these
we can't
benefits.
really appeal those decisions when those weren't the decisions that were made. So
I have a question. I want to make sure I understand what Scott's saying. The acreage, the area that we're talking about that he owns is 6.4 acres, right?
6.48, yeah.
Right.
And Scott is saying that of those 6.4 acres, only 4.1 are developable.
Yeah, close, 4.7, yes.
4.7?
Well, and in my experience, and Christina can correct me if I'm wrong, but undevelopable acreage is always calculated into the density.
It absolutely is.
That's where I'm saying absolutely not. So I don't want to belabor this because it's not helpful and beneficial. It seems like, but
So
let
do you
me
have
just
an example to provide?
yeah, please.
No, do you have an example to provide?
Yes, that's what I was going to do. In the last development I did, we came down to literally within 6 feet of countable area because over a 2-year process through committee, this was in Salt Lake County, we continued to lose square footage. Easement here, property realignment there. When we had 4 acres, we came nowhere near fully developing 4 acres, okay? We had with setbacks and roads, and it was a change.
Well, Scott, you need to focus on Grand County code. We're not in Salt Lake County.
No, this is common practice, and Chris is asking for an example, and so this is where I'm shocked
Well, I
by
was
that.
asking for an example that's pertinent to Grand County and Grand County's land use code, because that's what's in question here. We're talking about Grand County's laws and Grand County's general plan. The other thing I want to point out is the general plan is a guiding document. It's not a regulatory document. And so, just to make that clear, that it's at the discretion of the commissioners whether they follow the guidance of the general plan or not. But it had, the only thing that they're required to do is give consideration to it.
Okay, but I beg for a little bit of understanding. Do you mean guidance or code? Because let me talk about uniform. Yeah, uniform.
The general plan is not code. It's not a legislated regulatory document. It's a guiding document.
Thank you. And what
it does not.
So, hey, I'd like to make a suggestion because we don't want this to go on forever. And, in other quasi-judicial proceedings, one side presents their arguments, then another side presents some arguments, and then maybe there's a chance for a short back and forth. I'm just wondering if we should follow that same format. And once both sides have had, a couple of opportunities to speak about one issue, we move on to other issues, and then the commission tries to decide.
No, I think that's a good idea.
Please.
Yeah, thank you for that guidance. And I'm glad we're now talking about, sorry, yeah, go ahead. I'll say that.
So are there any more comments from the commissioners on number 2 in the interpretation?
I do have comments. I don't know whether it's appropriate to make them now or when we're explaining how we are voting the way we vote at the end. I'll go ahead and I do want to say something now because I think it's relevant. In my impression, and please someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but in Grand County, a lot of the lots have like 2 different acreages assigned to them. And one of them goes all the way to the center line of the road and it includes the street. And that's typically 1 acre exactly in rural residential. And then sometimes you'll see a depending on how that particular area is platted, you'll see a smaller acreage, like 0.85 in rural residential. And that's including the area that's not part of the road right of way. And again, in my experience, we have always used that larger thing when determining density and how many lots one can build. So if you go, I was just looking at a map right now, in rural residential areas, there's lots of lots that are less than 1 acre. And the reason they're less than 1 acre is because they're not counting half the road that's in front of their house. And so that's, maybe other counties do it differently, but I believe Grand County has always sort of not counted these, the footprint of the road does not account against you when you're developing, determining how many lots can be fit on a piece of land. Similarly, trees and ditches don't count against. Now, there is the only case I know of where you do subtract acreage is when we have steep slopes. And typically, if there's a slope over 30 degrees, then that gets subtracted and the remainder is, divided by the underlying density. So I just wanted to throw that out there since no one had made quite that point. And if someone thinks that's wrong, please let me know, because to me, that seems pretty relevant to this case.
Could I speak to that, Kevin? That we would agree with that. If tract 2 were developed the same as tract 1 that was previously approved, we would not all be here. Okay. And even furthermore, if the density were in line with that same argument, we wouldn't be here. We do not oppose development, and we do not oppose acreage being counted towards the 1 acre requirement, as was previously the case. We don't oppose that at all, but that's not what's being implemented here. And you are right. We totally agree with road previously being counted towards the total required acreage to have a lot, a 1 acre lot requirement.
I'd like to add to Kevin's comments. The reason you see those smaller lots is we've been using the PUD tool since the 90s, and it does allow us flexibility in the lot configuration to set aside the road parcels into separate parcels, because that is best practice. Here, that is especially important because of the roadway East Bench Road. So Creekside Lane is a private lane, and it is addressed in the CCRs for phase 1, and the applicant has indicated he will have a similar CCR proposal in phase 2, and the county would certainly require that the management of Creekside Lane is addressed in the CCR as part of the final plat approval. But above and beyond that, you have East Bench Road at the north end of Tract A, which is accessed by all these folks outside of the subdivision. So it's extremely important here that we place the road in a separate parcel. The PUD tool allows us to do that per that 4.4.1C. And then the place where the underlying lot size is set forth is 5.4.1A, and it does require minimum lot size in the rural residential 1 acre. And that 1 acre is not set aside by, or is not defined in any way by developable land. So it's 1.0 acre total, including all the parts.
Let me just clarify to that. When you plat the land for the final plat for approval, you draw the lines and the setbacks essentially, and the access to them through the roads. That's the final area where you know how many developable lots you will yield from whatever tract you're considering. Okay. I want to keep going, but I've understood that's not as helpful.
Well, I think that the commissioners get your argument here. And so let's move on to another part of the appeal, if you would like. Do you have any other things that you'd specifically like to address?
Yeah, I think that the balance of those certainly are carefully and well orchestrated by Christina's writing. I don't think that any of them, of course, they're there in the agenda. And yes, those are all that we would like to appeal. But this one I thought required a little, or would be benefit from a little more discussion around it. So the balance of them, we would just like to look at and have responded to.
Okay. All right, so at this point then, I'd request that the commission make a motion to either uphold or amend the interpretation and then engage in discussion.
And just to clarify too, the commission's opinion here, finding will be verbal only. There's no written follow-up. So just keeping that in mind during our discussion. unless you choose to modify, and then I suppose there may be some follow-up modification.
So I'm looking for a motion. Is that correct?
I would move to uphold the findings. Is that enough of a reference?
Uphold
need-
the presentation.
The interpretation provided
Dated January 11th, 2021.
of January 11th, 2021.
I'll second Evan's motion.
Motion by Evan, seconded by Jacques. Do we have discussion on this one?
Yeah, to
I-
the- Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Evan.
I would say that to me, I feel that we did follow the land use code. I feel like we did listen to benefits for the community as well as the property owner. So to the 2 points in question, I feel that there was the acreage from separating the road shouldn't be subtracted, and that because had the owner had a vested right to subdivide into 6 lots with 6 residents per the stipulations recorded in 97, that this was in line with that, and that that all kind of falls within the PUD tool, the land use code, and even the suggested or guiding general plan.
Thank you, Evan. Evan?
Sure. Yeah, as I do think that the when calculating density for purposes of determining how many lots there can be, I think we have always in the county included the footprint of the road in that. And I think whether it's platted separately or not doesn't make a difference. And I think, we're just being consistent in continuing to do things that way. I guess I wanted to open by saying I understand the frustrations of, being a neighbor and having an adjacent property developed in a way that doesn't seem appropriate to you, and that, maybe doesn't seem to follow the rules, at least from your point of view. I've, spent most of my time in Grand County, on the outside, as a neighbor. But I do, and so I think I'm inclined to, maybe lean toward neighbors rather than developers in these sorts of questions. But in this particular instance, I just really don't see anything wrong with this modification to the PUD that was being made. I think, it does not increase the density, and I don't agree with these arguments about 4.7 acres, et cetera. So you should include the roads. I also don't think it's misusing the PUD. I'm looking at in our land use code 441, one of the purposes of the PUD is to promote clustering in the interest of preserving rural character. That's 441D. Now, people might disagree with that, and maybe we should change the land use code. But it's, again, I've lived here 30 years, and it's always been my understanding that one of the purposes of a PUD was to provide flexibility in drawing lot lines. And that flexibility, could be, there's a list of purposes that it could be used for, and you just have to satisfy one of them, not all of them. The one we think about a lot is public open space. That's not an issue here, but it does say in 441 that one of those purposes is, the past commissions have preferred clustering to a uniform 1 acre lot size. So for those are the reasons that I want to uphold the interpretation.
What I think would be helpful too, and comments going forward, is we focused on density, and so that's great. And I appreciate the comments, particularly about density, and I think that's important. But we do have 4 questions in the request for interpretation. And so as to the other 3, what would be helpful is for commissioners to either state that they've read the Mila's interpretation and they're comfortable with her interpretation on the other 3 items. Or if you have any questions on those, because you haven't focused on the other 3, then we should talk through them on the record, just FYI.
And you're talking about the questions about why we did not follow the land use code and why we.
Right, and number 1, 3, and 4 from Mila's interpretation are items we haven't talked to at length today.
Yeah, I hope that my comments reflected that I don't agree that our decisions would benefit the developer only and did not consider following the land use code. I also think that everything we did was within the land use code. So we did follow that. So that would be number 1 and number 4. So for number 3, it goes back to the planned unit development being a tool that's been implemented and is available for us to use, and that it was going back to the decisions that were made in the 90s regarding this particular property. Does that help, or is that?
And that's helpful, thanks.
Thank you, Evan. Thank you, Evan.
I just want to chime. I agree with what Evan said about the other, items 1, 3, and 4.
Any other commissioners have anything they'd like to comment on? I know I went out there 2 or 3 times and walked around and looked at the area, and I felt like the person could divide this up into 6 acres and sell long, thin acres, as opposed to what we traditionally think of as an acre being created. And so I thought this was a valuable way to keep areas without development, and clustering would help that. So I agree with Mila's findings.
Yeah, so I don't honestly feel like I have a whole lot to add to the conclusions that Evan and Kevin presented. I agree that it's an appropriate and best use practice as it is applied, the PUD in this instance, and establishing that cluster while maintaining the underlying density under the way that it's interpreted in Grand County. So I guess I would just fall in line with the statements made previous.
This is Sarah, and I don't have anything to add beyond what has already been said on the public record, and I agree with our original decision and the reasons that you all have outlined, the other commissioners. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll say I spent a few hours with this last night, looking back at it this morning again as well, and it's tough. It's a tough one, and it's forced me to go back and look at the LUC and learn, I guess, more than anything. But I find Christina Sloan's argument compelling, especially concerning the density really not changing from the 1997 PUD counting the road.
And I presume it doesn't matter that this is not clustered. You have 3 large lots and 3 small.
There's been a motion, and this period
I'm just raising it on the public record because it's a fact. Christina, you don't need to talk over me. It's not helpful. You can talk about procedures. I'm just saying it's been shared with the group that a cluster is a reason and benefit of this. And I'm just pointing out, just for understanding, this is not cluster.
Mr. Anderson, it's not appropriate for you to be speaking right now.
Yeah. Well, as a taxpayer, I'll speak.
Please.
Okay. I'll respond briefly to that. I don't know if we have a definition of clustering in the land use code, but it sure seems clustered to me. In other
We
words,
actually do
some
have the definition of.
some of the houses are closer together, and to me, that's what clustering means. And if it's defined elsewhere in the land use code, I've never seen it.
So you think it's in land use?
It's in the land use code and section 10.2, which is our definitions, a cluster development. It's a development design technique that concentrates buildings in specific areas on a site to allow the remaining land to be used for recreation, open space, and agricultural uses. And so again, we have talked about cluster today. We've also talked about the flexibility and lot configurations, or the flexibility and how we draw those lot lines. And those were, that's language that we've heard out of various commissioners as well.
Okay, Mary, is there any more discussion, or are we ready to call?
Are there any more discussion? And this is the one that that is being appealed. Yes. So are we ready for a vote on the motion? Any further discussion? I will, because of the controversy around this, I think it's important that I have a verbal response rather than just asking for a raise of hand or an aye. So we will start with Kevin.
Yes, in favor of the motion to uphold the interpretation.
Jacques?
I'm in favor of upholding the interpretation.
Gabriel?
In favor of the motion to uphold.
Sarah?
Also in favor of the motion to uphold.
And myself in favor, yes. So it passes unanimously.
Did we get Evan?
Oh, no, I didn't get Evan. Honey for Evan. Because his camera, okay, Evan?
Yes.
You? Yes. So the motion passes unanimously.
Okay, thanks, guys. We don't need to put anything out in writing. So the interpretation is affirmed and this proceeding is closed. Thank you.